How are they all reacting to this tonight?
Biden has a lot of family expressions, and one of them I've heard him invoke so often is that family is everything. It is the beginning, it is the middle, and it is the end. And in the, yes, more than a decade that I've covered President Biden, I have seen them come together to celebrate some of their greatest triumphs, the election, the inauguration most recently. But I've also seen them have to publicly endure some of the most difficult, some of the most tragic moments as a family. And this is one that, yet again, has brought the family together to have to really take stock of a very difficult moment. Really, the past week and a half has been so difficult to have to relive through this trial the most difficult moments of their family, starting with the death of Beau Biden and what it did to, especially Hunter Biden, leading to that addiction to drugs. But as I've been talking with people close to the family, Stephanie, tonight, I've really been struck by a tone of defiance, a resoluteness about what comes next. There's been a lot of concern about what this might mean politically, but also what this might mean personally for President Biden. He's just 21 weeks away from his last election. He's just 16 days away from a consequential, potentially, debate against Donald Trump. But the tone that I am hearing from people close to the president is that they are so proud of their public service as a family, and that nothing is going to stop them from achieving the goal that is set out in front of them. They know they have a difficult task ahead. The politics, the legal situation does not get easier road from here, but they are determined to face this together as a family.
Harry, you wrote in the LA Times that the jury's decision was right, but the prosecution's was wrong. I don't think I know what that means.
Well, let me try. So Department of Justice guidelines, Stephanie, have ways of handling cases. And cases like this, in which someone lies on a form but doesn't do any other crime with the gun or isn't part of a gang or whatever, are universally dismissed or not treated with the severity that David Weiss treated this one. And that's how David Weiss first proposed to treat this one about a year ago, when the gun charges were going to be the subject of a diversion agreement, that if Hunter Biden kept clean for 2 years, it would go away. So the screaming question that not the jury verdict, but the decision to charge presents, and I don't know what the answer to this question is what happened since then to so change Weiss's view of what was the proper punishment and treatment of Hunter Biden to take it outside how DOJ practice normally would treat it. And of course, because he's a special counsel, no one in the DOJ supervisory structure, which normally would say, we don't do that to these cases, here's how we handle these cases. No one was there to say that. And I think it's certain, for whatever reason, that Hunter was treated way more severely than another defendant with the same facts.
Susan, you have written that you don't think a game changer could change voters' minds about this election. So I'm assuming you think this verdict is not going to have much of an impact here.
Steph, we're getting to the point where you're anticipating me too well. I mean, look, if Donald Trump's conviction and becoming the first convicted felon in American history who is a former president, if that was not a radical change in the election, I certainly don't see the conviction of a private citizen, even one who is the son of the current president, to be that elusive thing, a game changer in this 2024 race. It's that close. There was minor incremental shift at best toward Biden. It's not entirely clear how this conviction of Biden's son will play politically. Certainly Republicans were immediately questioning this, saying, well, this is really just a distraction. There were all sorts of instantaneous conspiracy theories, default setting from some of Trump's public supporters and defenders. Hunter Biden isn't running for president, and that's the bottom line here. There's no evidence that years of investigations of him, of, dragging his name around has really affected Biden's political standing, and I don't anticipate this would either.
Hunter Biden isn't running for president. We should remind our audience he has no role in our government, past, present, and no plans for the future. Harry, what could he be looking at as far as his sentence goes?
Well, so the standard guidelines, Steph, would dictate a sentence of between 15 and 21 months just based on the conduct and his lack of criminal history. But those are just recommendations. My best guess, consistent with what I was just saying about how people who don't do anything else other than lie on the form are treated, is that he'll receive a fair bit less than that from the judge. Remember, however, that there is still the tax charges that he has to face. And David Weiss today made it clear that, as he put it, the investigation is ongoing, and he may be targeting some of Hunter Biden's conduct in 2014 or so in China in business dealings. But for this charge itself, I expect him to get a sentence that's a matter of months, not the 15 to 21 that the guidelines would otherwise dictate.
But even if it's just a few months, Hunter Biden, unlike most people in his situation, has Secret Service protection. So how does that work?
Your guess is as good as mine, although we've been thinking about it. We know the Secret Service prepared a plan when it came up with Donald Trump. Trump was going to have his own wing, and people would be there. There would have to be a lot of cooperation with local authorities, although here it's easier because it's federal authorities, right? Bureau of Prisons and Secret Service. So that will be worked out one way or another. I think that's sort of the least of the practical issues that this conviction poses today.
Michael, you just sort of laid it out for us how close the Biden family is, how defiant the president is when it comes to protecting his family, how he talks about the family. Right around this time last year, I interviewed the president, much to his team's chagrin, anger, fury. I asked him about Hunter, and he very clearly said, "My son is an innocent man. My son is a good man." The president is now headed deeper into this campaign, to the debate stage. How is he going to handle the questions he's asked, the narrative around Hunter, now that we've got this guilty verdict and a president who does respect the rule of law and decisions made by a jury?
Well, just think about the gauntlet that's ahead, Steph. I mentioned 16 days from now is that first debate. The preparation is so critical. The president tomorrow is leaving for an important foreign trip. He's going to be at the G7 summit meeting with other key leaders, as well as Pope Francis. You know how close this president is with that Jesuit Pope. It's going to be an interesting meeting. But then he comes back and has just a little over a week to prepare for that debate. We've never in modern history seen a rematch between combatants like Trump and Biden. And we know the strategy on the part of the former president is very likely to try to get under President Biden's skin and to potentially use this against him. The Biden team looks back at 2020 when, yes, Hunter Biden was again a frequent political cudgel that Trump tried to use against him. And the president's advisors say it didn't work then. It actually backfired on Donald Trump. And so they are presenting this as a do this at your own peril to Donald Trump. But I do think that is a concern of people close to President Biden, that as important as this debate is and as important as preparation is, will he be able to focus on the task at hand? The answer very clearly from those close to the president I've spoken to today is that's not going to be an issue.
Susan, I am sure you remember this question. Former President Trump, his friends at Fox News said it over and over and over. Where's Hunter? They said it for days, weeks, months. It seemed like years. Yet after today's verdict, the Trump campaign was basically silent, basically saying, oh, it's just a distraction. What in the world is going on here, Susan?
Well, first of all, Steph, I guess now that Donald Trump himself wears the label of convicted felon and has, been at the spearhead of the most kind of concerted assault that we've ever seen, I think, by one political party in this country against, the very legitimacy of the legal system. It's not exactly a comparison that is a favorable one, where you have Democrats from the president on down today saying, listen, we respect the rule of law. Biden isn't going to issue a pardon for his own son. As painful as this is, we think that, the jury system works and things like that. And so the contrast with Trump is obviously one that is very unfavorable and one that they're not eager to. And I'm just struck by how quickly Trump's allies immediately reverted to conspiracy theories and make believe. I can't stress that enough. They are still in burn it down mode when it comes to our legal system. And that includes, trying to imply that this case is a distraction from the real secret that's being covered up, the real case that should be brought against Hunter Biden. Whatever the conspiracy theory is, it's part of a really purposeful political plan to rip down the authority and the legitimacy of the legal system because of Donald Trump, because of one man.